The ancient races held the answers. The Old Ones, the Necrons, the Eldari. Soon we shall hold all the pieces to the puzzle that they held only in part. We shall fit them together. We shall succeed where they failed, and overcome the monsters spawned by our own minds. Around 60 million years ago, long before humanity rose on ancient Terra, there was a war of such magnitude we can scarcely fathom its scale. The Old Ones were masters of the Imperium, and these powerful psykers unleashed the powers of the warp upon reality. But their enemies, the Necrons and the Catan, were masters of the Materium. They could destroy planets in an instant, extinguish suns, they could even utilize black holes as weapons of war. In the 41st millennium, humanity understands little of this conflict, but Archmagus Dominus Belisarius Cawl believes that this ancient war fundamentally weakened the fabric of reality, causing a fault line where the warp could spill through into real space, not in a dissimilar way to the region of space known as the Eye of Terror. The Necrons wanted to stabilize this fault, so across hundreds of worlds throughout the galaxy, they constructed massive pylons, and the key ingredient in these pylons is a material known as Blackstone. Blackstone or Noctilith can be charged to amplify or nullify the warp, and so the Necrons used this on their pylon worlds to stabilize the fault line and limit the power of the Old Ones. No doubt this greatly aided the Necrons in their war effort, and thereafter they and the Catan were finally able to defeat their ancient enemy. With the Old Ones vanquished, the Necrons turned on their allies, only managing to kill one Catan, but in most cases sundering them into shards. In their triumph, the leader of the Necrons, the Silent King, saw that the time of his race was over, for the moment at least. The mantle of galactic dominion would soon pass to the Eldari, a race who had fought alongside the Old Ones. The Silent King was certain that the time of the Eldari would pass, as did the time of all flesh. So it was that the Silent King ordered the remaining Necrons to enter a great sleep, to wait 60 million years, but awake ready to rebuild all that they had lost, to restore the Necron dynasties to their former glory. And as for the Necrons' pylon worlds distributed throughout the galaxy, well, some perished, but many persisted, keeping the fault line secure all this time. That was until the Despoiler rose as the War Master of Chaos. No one knows how Abaddon came to discover the secrets of the galaxy, but it appears that for 10,000 years they were central to his plans. Across his first 12 Black Crusades he led against the Imperium, he would secretly ensure that dozens of pylon worlds were destroyed, but ensuring that the Imperium was blind as to his secret plans. Then finally, during the 13th Black Crusade, the world of Cadia was destroyed. This was the final pylon world needed. Abaddon's planning had paid off. Some say a ritual of Magnus the Red or the stirring of the Eldar god of the dead, Iniad, played a part. Whatever the case, a great rift sprang up along this fault line, a series of warp storms that have divided the Milky Way galaxy. Many worlds were lost immediately, in a time now referred to as the Blackness, and the Great Rift still divides the Imperium to this day. Through this Cicatrix Maledictum, the forces of chaos are able to reach further into the Emperor's realm. But not all hope is lost. Rabute Guilliman, the Avenging Son of the Master of Mankind, now seeks to heal his father's realm, to reunite the Emperor's worlds as before. He chose one of his best minds for this task, the before-mentioned Archmagus Belisarius Cawl. Cawl had been instrumental in reviving the Primarch in this misbegotten time, and he had even improved upon the Emperor's own designs, creating the Primaris Space Marines. Given the importance of closing the Great Rift, Guilliman and Cawl felt it necessary to stay in contact And that's quite difficult at the best of times in 40k, but is even more difficult since the creation of the Great Rift. So in order to stay in touch, Cawl gifted the Primarch with the Cawl Inferior. This device resides on the Ultramarines flagship, the Macrack's Honor, behind an extensive amount of security. Officially, the device is to allow them to communicate over great distances without the need for astropaths and without their messages being disrupted by the warp. According to Cawl, it does this in two ways. The first is by relaying the messages to its companion device on Cawl's ship, the Zarquazitor, and the second is through a series of preloaded responses that Cawl has told Guilliman he put into the device. However, Guilliman has noticed multiple times that the device talks to him just like Belisarius Cawl does. In fact, the Avenging Sun is even starting to wonder, has Belisarius Cawl put an artificial or abominable intelligence onto my flagship? This would be incredibly heretical, so of course, yeah, that's basically what Cawl did. The device uses 20 severed human heads that mouth along as it talks and sometimes scream in pain, and it has components from humanity's Dark Age and even from Xenos civilizations. One of the Cawl Inferiors tells us that Belisarius Cawl put these components together so that he could create a backup of his own mind. If you are at all familiar with the Warhammer 40k universe, you know how over the line this is, even for Belisarius Cawl. But it's about to get much worse. Copying his own mind is bad, but Belisarius Cawl also attempted to create an abominable version of Guilliman's mind. Belisarius Cawl knows all too well how difficult it can be for him to work with Guilliman, so he approximated a copy of Guilliman's mind so that he could run ideas past it just to check whether Guilliman would kill him or not. The irony being, of course, that if Guilliman ever found out about this device, I think most of us would expect the Avenging Sun to take that big flaming sword to the Archmagus's head. Nevertheless, putting this absolute heresy to the side, Belisarius Cawl does use this device in the book Genefather. Before we take a look at that conversation though, I just want to take a moment to thank the sponsor for today's video, Starforged. They make amazing Warhammer 40k merch licensed by Games Workshop, such as this stainless steel gold-plated Imperial Aquila pendant. It is precisely the kind worn by the Imperium Space Marines and Imperial Guardsmen. So if you do find yourself near an Inquisitor and you want to prove your loyalty to the Emperor or hide your loyalty to the Ruinous Powers, then this is the way to do it. The pendant makes the perfect gift for a wargaming buddy or overzealous chaplain. Starforged also have more sweet 40k merch on their website for you to check out. There's links in my description and the top comment, and the pendant link will give you an 8% discount as well. Upon the screen was the face of the Avenging Sun.
Belisarius Cawl, what have you done?
Guilliman's voice roared out, not the smooth, perfect facsimile employed by the Cawl Inferior. This one was projected by crackling voxmeters. The tinniness of the audio and the sketchiness of the visual barely reduced the sense of rage emanating from the simulacrum. Please, my lord, must we go through this every single time I activate you?
Yes, we absolutely must,
the boxed Primarch said.
You have taken a great liberty making a copy of my mind. If I knew about this, I would most certainly destroy you. You have gone too far.
Firstly, I don't think you would. Yes, of course you would be unhappy with me, and I might have a lot of grovelling to do, but this is a fairly minor indiscretion compared to some of my other, adventures. Secondly, this simulacrum was created for the best of reasons, to ascertain how the Primarch would be once awoken from stasis. Nobody wanted another Horus. Thirdly, you know all this already. You know who you are, you know why I made you. So please, can we get down to business?
I suppose he might, forgive this.
I think so.
He has forgiven far worse, for less sound reasons.
Exactly.
But an exact copy of the Primarch's mind.
I can't make an exact copy of you, my lord. corrected Cawl. The fact that the Guilliman Inferior calmed down so easily was proof of that. For all his regal bearing and buttoned-up manner, the real Guilliman had quite the temper once provoked. So much so Cawl had toned the false Primarchs down a little. The science behind the creation of the Primarchs is lost. It was deliberately destroyed by your original's father. If I can't make an organic version of you, I can't make a perfect machine version either. Quod erat demonstrandum.
Why would my father do such a thing?
The Guilliman Inferior asked peevishly. Some of its emotional responses were puerile.
Why would my father destroy the information required to make us?
You are the best simulation of Guilliman's mind I could create, my lord. Surely you can hazard your own guess.
Tell me you're theoretical,
said the false Primarch. It often threw back such requests. Whether that meant it did have an idea or not, Cawl had never been able to determine.
I demand it. I am the avenging son.
Cawl sighed. Very well. It must have been the Emperor who destroyed the patterns for the Centaurius lobe of the Immortis gland. I can think of no one else who could. All the other information required to build your kind was held within the Sang Prima's portum. But, if I'm honest, I'm surprised he allowed the information to survive at all. Granted, the genetic material in the vessel is pure, but there exist other repositories of gene seed upon Terra, which I could have re-engineered quite easily. Why would this information have been kept, if not in a complete state? Or even if retaining the information for the creation of Space Marines? If it was so dangerous, why keep any of that pertaining to the creation of Primarchs at all? Cawl did one of his complicated shrugs. His shoulders looked frail without his upper cowling. The minds of the Omnissiah are not for us to understand, I suppose.
My father is not a god,
thundered the false Primarch. If we're going down that route, then he's not your father either. You do not have a father. I am more your father than the Emperor is.
You are not my father.
Exactly. That's my point. Nobody is your father.
This is most unsatisfactory,
said Guilliman, which was more of an expression Cawl might use than the Primarch, which only proved his point about this Guilliman being imperfect. Are you going to answer my question, or are we going to spend our time arguing? Cawl asked. Sometimes dealing with the Guilliman Inferior was a little too much like dealing with the original. So, where was I?
The father of Rabute Guilliman destroyed crucial information to prevent the creation of new Primarchs, but he only destroyed some of it, not all of it, which makes little sense.
I can only think he looked upon the unfolding heresy and thought, let's not do that again. But that is an assumption. Assumptions are of little worth, so let us go out on a limb. Perhaps he foresaw what was to happen, and this information was meant for me. Theoretical.
Are you mocking me?
Boomed the Guilliman Inferior. Not at all. The ultramarine dialectic is a useful mental tool. Theoretical. He destroyed the information to prevent it falling into the wrong hands, but left just enough information that a genius could discover what was needed, should it ever be needed again, which it is.
A genius like you,
said Guilliman. Maybe someone like me. Ergo, your protests are moot, as I've got carte blanche to do as I want, because I am engaged in fulfilling the Omnissiah's will. And this is the greatest puzzle my god could set me.
Blasphemy.
See, Guilliman would never use that word. He's very anti-spiritual, our lord and master. You're just a copy, and not a good one at that.
The accuracy of my pronouncements aside, I am not convinced by your argument.
No, nor am I. I'd have to be especially solipsistic to believe I'm some sort of chosen one.
Many great men have fallen into that trap. The corollary of solipsism is hubris. Beware, Belisarius Cawl.
My lord, nobody likes hubris, which leads me to the reason I have awoken you.
You wish to put your information to me, in order to see how my original will react.
The archaic screen flared, interference lines tracked across the glass. The Guilliman Inferior seemed to be momentarily realer. It shouldn't do that. Cawl felt a pang of unaccustomed unease and wondered just what exactly he had created. That is correct. My analysis of the data code from the Pharos Xenos engine is complete. I have identified multiple sites of interest across both halves of the Imperium, far too many to investigate them all thoroughly myself. So I've practically emptied the Zarquazitor of my followers, sending them out across the galaxy. One might say my Conclave Acquisitoris is fully occupied acquiring. Fortunately, I am past the time where I need to visit all these places myself. My plans are well underway. Very shortly, I'll have all the Noctilith I need to proceed to Phase 3 of my plans.
Lord Guilliman would have no issue with these tidings, for they are good tidings,
said the Guilliman Inferior. Cawl winced inwardly at its occasional idiocy. This Guilliman was like a child's idea of a Primarch, heroic, bombastic, and sometimes stupid. That's not the news. The other you is waiting for prototype pylons of my own manufacture to be activated to close up a minor warp rift. A proof of concept, if you like. And I can do it. I've got most of the knowledge I need. Trades in the Infinite puts me on the right track, back on Cadia, although most is my own work. It was difficult, it took time, longer than I thought, and he's getting impatient.
Then why do you not simply tell him why the pylons are not yet working?
Cawl felt a little irked, but who could blame him? Because he won't like that, and then he'll do his level best to compel me to return to him, and I'll have to put up with one of his interminable lectures about honor and truth and all that. You know, one of those meetings where he monologues on forever and calls it a conversation. The man's basically talking to himself half the time.
I do,
said the Guilliman Inferior.
And how dare you?
I do dare, said Cawl indignantly. I know he is the last best hope of Imperium and mankind both, but between you and me, he can be quite tedious. I've been alive for nigh on 11,000 years, and even I don't have time to listen to him. I'm doing my best to do what I said I would do. I need him to leave me alone while I do it. Only now he wants to know exactly what I'm up to. I'm in a corner somewhat.
Can you do what you promised? Can you close the Pit of Raucus?
I always deliver on my promises, for I am Belisarius Cawl.
That is not the answer to the question.
Curse it all, no it's not. Every one of Cawl's limbs rattled with tension. The basics of it are that my pylons will only work perfectly, and they have to work perfectly, if I have a certain piece of information, additional data as it were, to create machine spirits which can fully synchronize their efforts. One of the pylons I can get to work just fine, but a network, there I have a lack.
Then you cannot do what you said you would.
Yes, I can, just not yet. I can only get that piece of information from a place that is difficult to get to. I need help to get it. To that end, I've called in some favors from the Forge Worlds of Akatran, Metallica, and Tigris. I've called a conclave on the artificial world of Pontus Avernus. This last phase is exceedingly dangerous, and I am going to need a lot of help.
What perils will you face? Will these have a bearing on how the Primarch will receive your news?
I'm reluctant to say.
That is a certain yes. Might I inquire why you are so reluctant?
Because there's a good chance that you, being a reasonable facsimile of the Primarch and with the shadow of his temper, will be enraged by what I intend. You might blow your tube there, Cawl said, waving a talon at the screen.
This does not portend well for a favourable reception from the real Guilliman.
Indeed not, which is why I have activated you. Then Cawl told the Guilliman Inferior what he intended to do. The reaction was everything he feared it would be. I love it in that passage when Cawl insults Guilliman and talks about how Guilliman gives him lectures all the time and they're very long and very boring, and Guilliman basically just talks to himself, and then the Guilliman Inferior goes, yeah, I know what you mean, but how dare you say that to me? It's just, I love that. Guy Haley's writing of Belisarius Cawl is really good. It's definitely some of his best writing, in my opinion. If you're familiar with Black Library authors, you know, Guy Haley kind of gets a lot of very random books, it seems. He kind of fills books in here and there. He's done Night Lords, he's done Blood Angels, he's done Raven Guard. He'll kind of just fill in wherever there's kind of a lack of an author, it seems, at times. But Belisarius Cawl is very much his creation. He's written everything from his introduction in the Heresy all the way through to like his appearances in the Dawn of Fire series through to Genefather. So I actually really like this character, and Belisarius Cawl was a really controversial character when he came in because he's incredibly powerful. So one of the things he reveals in the previous novel, Belisarius Cawl: The Great Work, is that he can kind of heal the damage, for example, that the Tyranids inflict upon a world. And that's a massive powerhouse to have in the setting. And of course, he can revive Primarchs. So he was controversial for obvious reasons, because anybody that kind of comes in out of nowhere and is that powerful is always going to stir some opinions. But he's such a well-written character. One thing they don't really do in that novel, but they do in the other novels, is Belisarius Cawl kind of choosing personalities and choosing fighting styles before he goes into combat or any kind of diplomatic situation. So yeah, I don't know, it's a tangent, but I just want to say I really like this character, and I'm kind of glad he gets so much attention in the lore. Anyway, so if you can't tell from that passage, Belisarius Cawl has got a plan. He knows that this plan is absolutely crazy. He knows he can't pull it off himself. He's pretty confident that Guilliman's going to react very badly. So the question is, what is the plan? Well, we actually find out later in the book, because that meeting he has with other leaders of other Forge worlds does go ahead. And it's quite a funny passage. There's basically a trial for Belisarius Cawl at the start, because of course many within the Adeptus Mechanicus don't like Belisarius Cawl. Some like him because he has done so much in terms of finding STCs, and in terms of what he's done for the Imperium is objectively a pretty good thing with the whole reviving the Primarch. But Belisarius Cawl is seen as a heretic by some within the Adeptus Mechanicus, because he, in their eyes, creates new things, and you're not supposed to do that. So one of the things they talk about in the novel is that the Adeptus Mechanicus view the technology humanity had in the Dark Age of technology as the best technology, which doesn't mean the most powerful. It doesn't mean that they could beat every other faction. It's just like the best version of technology you could ever have. So they seek to attain that level by finding relics from mankind's past, but they don't make new things, whereas Belisarius Cawl does. We find out there are some of the Inquisition are wanting to take Belisarius Cawl down. He's done very heretical things. In the previous novel, Belisarius Cawl: The Great Work, Cawl encounters a Catan shard, which he teleports across the galaxy, and so they bring that up with him, and he's like, in my defense, I threw it at some Necrons. So he gets away with that. And he has an excuse for his heresy, which is that he doesn't make new things, he just remakes the things that humanity has lost. So he kind of argues his way out of an execution in that, and he is allowed to make his case to the other members of the Adeptus Mechanicus. And he does so, and he reveals his plan to them all. And the plan goes something like this. So when Belisarius Cawl went to Sotha, in the previous novel, he investigated a device known as the Pharos device. I won't go into the details now, but the Pharos device is a very important device in the Horus Heresy and 40k. And when he investigates this device, he's trying to find out more information about Necron technology, Necron pylons, and how they work, so he can kind of understand how the pylons work, how he can create a network, which he talks about in that passage, and ultimately link up kind of all these pylon worlds and hopefully close the Great Rift. And initially he just wants to close a minor warp rift that Guilliman has said, you know, if you can close this minor warp rift first, we use that as a proof of concept. If your plan works, we'll try it on the rest of the Great Rift. So Belisarius Cawl examines the Pharos device, and he does get some information. And some of the information he gets is basically a map that details planets throughout the galaxy that have Necron pylons on, and planets within that chain that are important to the connections all working well. And even the Eldar, for example, realized how important these Necron pylons were, and so the Eldar didn't destroy these Necron worlds over the 60 million years that they were essentially dominant in the galaxy. Now, there was one planet within this chain that had been consumed by a dark hole, which the Imperium calls Caligan's Maw. And this planet, Cawl can tell from the information he finds at the Pharos device, is very important. And he can also see that this black hole is not natural. It's a star that has collapsed because the Necrons, or the old ones, fired some incredibly powerful weapon at this star, causing it to collapse, which consumed the planet. So it was clearly very important within the ongoing war of the War in Heaven. Belisarius Cawl therefore theorizes that this planet, this destroyed planet, is basically the last place he could go to get more information on the Necron pylons, to reverse engineer that so he can kind of create his own network or improve upon the Necrons' network. However, of course, the planet has been destroyed. And this is where Belisarius Cawl's basically crazy plan comes in. I will read you pretty much exactly what he says in the book so that I don't get the science of this wrong, because I'll be honest, I'm not a physicist. I don't know whether this works. If there's any physicists in chat, let me know whether this makes any sense, but to me it works out. So, many of us here have an inkling of the war in heaven between the most enigmatic Old Ones and their arch-foes, the Necrons, many millions of years ago. I surmise that their conflict fundamentally weakened the fabric of reality, causing this fault line that Abaddon has exploited. My researchers have revealed that the Necrons sought to stabilize the fault by the construction of their pylon worlds along what is now the route of the Great Rift. These green points represent those we know of. These yellow points we did not know of, until now. The Pharos was a superluminal beacon, one of a network of relay centers that facilitated instantaneous communication and transport between the worlds of the ancient Necron kingdoms. I have visited several of these places. The Pharos was, until its destruction, the most intact. From its archives, I have learned all this and more. At this point, he points to a new world, and he says, "This world is marked upon the ancient charts of the Pharos with numerous significant annotations. I have decoded these. Upon this planet, which the Necrons called Irtanathep, was a pylon control nexus, a little like the Pharos, perhaps with a different purpose. I believe that at some point it was attacked in order to stop its operation, and in the process the star was destroyed." And at this point, Belisarius Cawl reveals that they need to try and essentially time travel to this planet, or what he calls temporal dilation. Time slows under conditions of extreme gravity. This world was caught on the cusp of this black hole's event horizon. For any inhabitants, a second would last an eon. On this planet, at this moment, beings who lived before mankind's precursor species ever evolved will be looking to the sky in horror as their sun is swallowed, and they will be doing so for thousands of years after we have died. For them, it is millions of years ago. They are living in the past. This is why you want us. This is why you have requested so many magi. You wish to go there. So that actually came from one of the other Maguses who are at this conclave. So that is basically Belisarius Cawl's plan. He needs to travel to this planet, which I guess it depends what you call time travel. Someone pointed this out earlier to me, where I guess technically he's not going back in time so much as the planet is taking a very, very long time to be destroyed. And so technically it's kind of still around, but the question is, how do they get there? And in theory, Belisarius Cawl thinks he can go with his allies to this planet, examine it, understand how the Necron pylon system works, and then kind of reverse engineer it to create his own, with the ultimate aim of closing the Great Rift. And this is the plan that he takes to the Guilliman Inferior, because of course the mind goes wild as to the potentially massive consequences of doing this. So firstly, it could well be the case that there are significant parts of the Necron forces from the War in Heaven on this planet, as there could be members of the Old Ones on this planet if they're engaged in some sort of war. This could be how we see Old Ones in Warhammer 40K. We're essentially going to see a book in the future, presumably written by Guy Haley, where Belisarius Cawl and some of his allies, or just his allies, they're going to go and travel through temporal dilation to this planet. They're going to travel to the War in Heaven, basically, which is a time where we don't understand the War in Heaven. We can't fathom the level of technology. You know, as you heard in that passage, they could essentially throw black holes at one another if they wanted to. So this is absolutely wild, and the technology alone weaken the fabric of reality. Can Cawl travel there? Will he weaken the fabric even more? How is he going to get back? If there are Necrons and Old Ones who can't get out of that black hole planet, that planet being consumed by a black hole, how would Belisarius Cawl get out? It's a fascinating little plot point, and I love it. My headcanon is that closing the Great Rift, Eye of Terror, will unlink the Star Child from the Emperor's corpse. See, that's a really interesting idea. So that's very relevant to Modern 40k. Something we've spoken about a lot on the channel is this idea of the Star Child. Something people say quite often is that the creation of the Great Rift may have been a bit of a mistake by Abaddon, because it's kind of empowered the Emperor, and we've seen that multiple times. Me and Quipster did a whole stream talking about the various ways the books say the Emperor is now influencing the galaxy more and more. And so, yeah, in theory, it might be a little bit of a mistake, but that also means that closing the Great Rift should have the opposite effect, where closing the Great Rift should weaken the Emperor's influence on the galaxy. It would probably be a net gain for the Imperium, because, of course, the worlds of humanity would be reunited once more. What a lovely time that would be. But the Emperor specifically would be weakened a bit, or at least he wouldn't be able to extend his power into the galaxy. It also probably means that if they were ever to close the Great Rift, it also pushes forward the timeline for the creation of the Star Child, because I think that the thing that makes the most sense would be that the reason the Star Child could be born was because there was this tear through reality, the Great Rift, and that allowed the Emperor to be born into a child. And once the Great Rift is closed, the Emperor can no longer do that. So I do think that this storyline in that way affects the Star Child storyline, because I think they're probably going to want to complete at least the first part of that arc before the Great Rift closes. And I think closing the Great Rift would be cool. It's been around for about 10 years at this point, so I think it's kind of done its time. I guess the bigger question would be what they do about kind of Abaddon's journey. I guess technically, because Abaddon's got this alliance with Vashdor, he's probably less concerned about the Great Rift now, because him and Vashdor are currently on track to kind of discover this ancient weapon that will, well, we don't know what it will do, but they'll discover a key and a weapon and all this mysterious stuff, and in theory Abaddon and Vashdor can win. I'm not a physicist, but I did stay at Best Western last night. I listened to the Terrence Howard. Doesn't that count? Absolutely. I mean, I think that's basically a degree. This has nothing to do with the discussion, but I noticed that in previous streams, when you talked about the Emperor giving Primarch new gear, you never talked about his knee pad looking like a mask. I mean, that's fair, man. I mean, that's just a straight up miss from my end. Who gets the Emperor's knee pads? That's a great question. I don't know. But I would assume the knee pad got broken down for the Crux Terminatus. A massive shame, I know, to lose such a glorious knee pad. But yeah, there we have it. The Emperor's armor ended up getting broken down. They are actually going to mess up and summon a Catan into reality. That could very much be the outcome of this story. They just absolutely summon a Catan. Some Necron weapon follows them out of this planet. Perhaps the Silent King gets more technology from this that helps him build more stuff, his prior nexuses. I should say as well, actually, something connected to this storyline is that when it comes to Blackstone, there's really a three-way race to get Blackstone in Warhammer 40k right now. So we have Belisarius, cool, who's working for Rabute Guilliman and the Imperium. And the Imperium, of course, wants Blackstone so that they can close the Great Rift if they get enough of it. That's the general idea. On the opposite side of the ring, we have Abaddon the Despoiler. Abaddon the Despoiler wants to get lots of Blackstone because he basically wants to do the opposite. So, as I mentioned earlier, you can charge Blackstone the other way. And if you charge it the other way, it actually empowers the warp, or at least psychers nearby. And so if Abaddon got more Blackstone, he could use it to basically extend the Great Rift. Maybe send a tendril of, warp storms towards Terra and help him invade Terra, something like that. But, so that's the other side. And the other side of the ring, this ring's a triangle, is the Silent King. And the Silent King is a bit more extreme because he, of course, wants to build more Pariah Nexuses or expand his Pariah Nexus. So if he gets more Blackstone, he can actually create these, bigger and bigger pockets of space where he basically severs the connection to the warp. And that basically has the effect of severing people from their souls. Psychers have their powers massively diminished. Even normal humans, because most humans outside of blanks, they have souls. That's like 99.9999% of humans. They kind of have their connection to the warp lessened, and so they end up kind of becoming like zombies. The book describes it as, at the very least, they become very placid. So there's a race on to get more and more Blackstone, and generally we root for Belisarius, cool, unless you're a heretic or a Necron, which would be impressive. But so yeah, that's one of the biggest fights really nowadays in Warhammer 40k. I'm assuming Vashtor is going to rock up and affect all of that because that's his thing now. But it's pretty exciting. I have a bachelor's in physics. Well done. All signs point towards kinda. Think of the water planet in Interstellar. Their time will move relatively faster than people outside of the black hole. Yeah, but that's the thing. That's a good point, Henry, because if it works like an Interstellar, I've seen that film for a long time, that they didn't make it out to the same point, did they? His daughter was like old by the end of it. So if Belisarius Cawl made it out, a lot of time would have passed. So yeah, I don't know if they can do it that way. They need to figure out a way somehow to, because that's the thing. I guess you have to time travel in this situation because you're gonna have to go to the planet and do your stuff, get your information, and then you have to leave the planet, but back to the same time point. So even if it is temporal dilation, you're still gonna have to time travel, I guess, aren't you? In effect, because you have to go back in time when you leave. Does that make sense? I don't know. Maybe they will do a huge time jump and Belisarius Cawl will disappear in the 42nd millennium and he'll reappear in the 45th millennium. That would be rogue. It would be interesting. It's like how when Horus went into the portal on Molech, he spent ages in the warp gaining power, but when he came out, it had only been a few minutes. I mean, that's, I'm guessing, what they want to aim for, but it's easier to write with the warp because you just say, oh, the warp did it, and the warp mumbo jumbo, and that basically works most of the time. This is Warhammer 40k, so 100% they're going to mess this up and summon hell in the universe. I think this would be a really cool way to introduce like one old one to the setting. I think that would work really well. Another reason I would say that's quite likely, I did speak about this for quite a while on the member stream the other month, but the other reason I really like this idea is because if you've been watching my videos for a while, you might have noticed there's a few times I've mentioned things and gone, this is actually a really old piece of lore from like 1st edition, 2nd edition, 3rd edition, and they've brought it back in. So, for example, the Chaos Android that we talked about in the Men of Iron video, just the concept of the Star Child is this very old 40k storyline that they're bringing back in. They really like bringing old Warhammer 40k lore that's been like retconned back into the setting in some way. It doesn't have to be the exact same way, but in some way they bring it back to the modern 40k story. And I think this is a really good way to do this with the old ones, because the Slann are in Rogue Trader, that book there. They are in that book, and so they're missing from Warhammer 40k, and I quite like the idea that a single Slann, or old one, with a basically synonymous, I think, it's tough. Sometimes they're synonymous, sometimes not, but I typically treat them as synonymous. And I think that would be a really good way to bring one of them into the modern Warhammer 40k storyline. It would be really interesting to see how that old one reacted with Eldar. I don't know. I really like this idea. I don't know what you guys think. I just think it would be cool. It wouldn't be galaxy changing because there's only one old one, but it would be fascinating, in my opinion, to see this happen. And you could give the Necrons a win as well. Like maybe some Necrons escape the planet as well, and they end up, you know, bringing some new super weapon to the Silent King or something. It's a lot of cool stuff you can do with this. But I'll be, yeah, let me know what you guys think. Due to physics, time travel is possible, but only in one direction. So that kind of works then. If it's only possible in one direction, that works for me, because you can travel back in time to the planet. Sorry, you can just travel normally to the planet. It's just being destroyed at a certain point. And then you can travel backwards one way. And so then you end up in the same point that when you started. I should have really had like a theoretical physicist on for this stream, shouldn't I? Wouldn't the plan be to let the rift open to allow the Emperor to heal himself and close it afterwards? I guess that's pretty much what is happening now. So the Emperor is kind of growing in power. I don't think it's as easy as him just healing himself, because one of the things that's kind of going to be the end game of 40k, I believe, is the concept of healing the two halves of the Emperor's soul. So the Emperor's soul is split into two. And so Malgador basically implies that one day, or he says one day, they can be rejoined. And that would be the kind of the end game of Warhammer 40k, rejoining these two halves of the Emperor's soul, and then he can get up. And yeah, and all the bad guys. The only way it works is if you move the planet, or you somehow use science magic to weaken the effects of gravity on the planet. But when the stuff on the planet can get out, if you can. Oh, I see, Jonathan. Great suggestion. So you're saying that what they could do here is pull the planet out of the orbit or the vicinity of the black hole. And so you would pull this planet that... Oh, that's a great idea. I didn't think about that. I don't think they suggest that in the book, but that's a really cool idea. That would make sense, because you'd have this planet, which is... presumably, you know, there's a war going on between older ones and Necrons on it, or there's just a lot of Necrons on it, and you pull that out of the warp, out of the vicinity of the black hole, and then you can kind of kill the Necrons on it and investigate. That would be wild. That's a cool idea. Are they going to release a Krork? True. I mean, that's another great shout. So in theory, yeah, a Krork might be on this planet. That is true, because the lore that we have on Necrons, I was looking into it for this stream, the lore that we have from like the Eldar books and the Necrons books typically only mentions the Eldar in the War in Heaven, but it does also say that the older ones created the Krork. So presumably the Krork, or the Orcs, fought against the Necrons in the War in Heaven, along with the Eldari and the Old Ones. But it doesn't. The books never specify why Galactic Dominion then passed to the Eldar and not the Krork as well. And the Krork were left to, as we know, devolve into what we would call Orcs. So it'd be cool to get more lore on that, actually. That'd be really interesting. So is time traveling going also to be based in lore? Yeah, I think that one of the concerns people have with this kind of storyline, and a lot of storylines actually in 40k, is the concept of time travel, because time travel does exist in 40k, of course, or at least time manipulation, because the Necrons use time travel. The concept of the warp messing with time is very well established, and Psychers have used it to mess with time. Also, you have things like the Emperor foreseeing the future and all those kind of things. So the concept of time being malleable, being able to change things, is very much in the setting. But I think the writers have been careful to not use time travel too much, because when it comes to things like the Marvel universe, any number of fantasy genres, once you introduce the concept of time travel properly, and something that is, at least within the narrative, quite commonly accessed, everything becomes diminished. And the idea that you find out that all the deaths you read about in the Horus Heresy now count for so much less because you can just bring them back into 40k, for example, would ruin the setting. And that's why I like this storyline, because time travel can be cool when used to small effect, but it has to be limited. And this is a very limited, specific use of time travel, so I really like how they're kind of going about this. There are some others that do concern me. So, for example, the Dark Angels basically time travel in the book Unforgiven, and it creates like a loop and things like that. Again, it's just like, it's a very dangerous concept to play with. So Vashdor has the 3 engines, the T'Cholcha, I never know how to say it, the Aromaris and Plagueheart, and putting those together basically allows you to time travel, it seems. So perhaps that's to do with Vashdor's weapon and key that he's searching for. Perhaps they're lost in time. So I think we might see a bit of time travel with Vashdor as well. So, and additionally, when it comes to things like the 5th Chaos God, one of the questions people very often have is, if there's going to be a 5th Chaos God in the future, shouldn't we know about it now in 40k? Because a Chaos God that will exist in the future has always existed. So Slaanesh existed before Slaanesh existed. We've seen planets where they have records of Slaanesh from long before Slaanesh's birth. So time travel is a thing you have to be very careful with in the setting, and people, I think, are rightfully cautious about the writers introducing it. But I must say, I do really like this way because it's very limited and it won't be replicated all the time. I don't think it will undermine the setting. And so, yeah, but I'll be interested to see what you guys think. Let me know whether, time travel scares you, because I think it can kind of lessen the impact of the lore. It is the 45th millennium and somehow Dante is still failing to die. Very, very true. That would be funny. Maybe they will push the planet into the warp to get access to it, hence G-Man being furious. That's a cool idea. Yeah, you could do something like that. See, that's really thinking outside the box, guys. I like that. Cheers, Henry. Maybe like how they did the Orc that went into the warp and ended up going back in time and killing his past self, except maybe both versions of Cawl do a fusion to avoid a paradox. You could do that. Yeah, they could do he does a mind merge with himself. That would be a lot of ego in one body, but we'd love to see it. Cool. All right, guys. My voice is starting to go. So we're coming up to 2 hours. So I'm going to call it there. But thank you. So there we have it. Belisarius Cawl has created an approximation for Rabute Guilliman's mind as an AI. This is some of the greatest heresy we've ever discussed on the channel. But it is kind of cool, you've got to admit. And it serves a purpose, as Belisarius Cawl says. And now, Cawl has got that information in terms of, don't tell Guilliman your plans if your plans are to travel back in time or through temporal dilation to a point whereby you approach a war that is of such a magnitude that humanity can't fathom the scale. So yeah, don't tell Guilliman if that's your plan, is basically what we can draw from this story, which I think makes sense. But the fact that that is in the future of Warhammer 40k, this idea of Belisarius Cawl, I'm going to say time traveling. I don't know if it is time traveling. I'm not a physicist. Let me know in the comments. The idea of Belisarius Cawl time traveling is so interesting. I can't wait to see what they do. I hope we get to see like an old one, ancient Necrons called Necron Tech. And I guess this means that it's on the cards. We are working towards a major victory for the Imperium in terms of closing the Great Rift and healing the Emperor's realm. This would weaken the Emperor, but, strengthen the Imperium, perhaps. So can't wait to see what they do. There's a lot of things we can talk about here, but let me know in the comments what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please do like and subscribe. And if you want to join the channel, you can do so and get access to more content in addition and join the Discord, etc. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.